Episode 4, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. We are back. Hello and welcome. Wrestling Rebooked at gmail.com if you want to shoot on us. At WRebooked on Twitter, or you can use the hashtag Wrestling Rebooked. On today's show, we're talking about the recent WWE PPV, Extreme Rules, the horror show, maybe more ways than one. We're also going to have our finger on the pulse for the latest and hottest topic in wrestling at the moment, Wednesday Night Wars, and all things ratings. And on our review, we're going to be looking at the Undertaker's Last Ride, which has recently aired all 5 episodes on the WWE Network. So, with that in mind, to introduce our co-host, shooting from the hip, desperate to talk about the next cinematic match, the Spot Monkey himself, Andeve.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's not a cinematic match, but never mind, we'll get to that. Ready and raring to go over here.
Okay, let's kick things off, shall we? Extreme Rules horror show. Any eye-catching moments?
Yeah, very good. A few eye-catching moments. I think you have to split the show into 3 sections, or look at it in 3 ways. You have to look at the wrestling that happened in the ring. You have to look at the end of each match, and then you can just put off into the distance that cinematic match you're referring to, which isn't a match, that swamp event, and you sort of consider that separately. But I think that's how you have to approach Extreme Rules. And when you do that, from the ringing of each bell, each wrestler worked fairly well with what they were given. Obviously, it wasn't quite bell to bell because the ending of the matches were generally tarnished the quality of the match. But nevertheless, I'd say it's probably an acceptable pay-per-view, more good than bad. Again, we're just disassociating ourselves with that swamp event thing at the end. Again, don't know how well that is because pay-per-views are actually, the pay-per-view is actually good, or if that's just because WWE has lowered our expectations over the last few months. But decent enough and ready to talk about it.
All right, nice succinct opening. So, first match, the SmackDown Tag Titles, Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura against the New Day.
Yeah, what do you reckon?
Yeah, so I'm not really a fan of gimmick matches like that, at least not tables matches. You're basically just waiting for the next near fall of when someone might go through a table. And it doesn't really give any rise for opportunity for any of the talent to actually sort of tell a story in the ring. Call me old-fashioned, but that's kind of like what I like about wrestling, and you're never really going to get that with this type of match. I get that it's the opening match and you kind of want to set the standard, set the bar, if you will. But for me, just not really that enjoyable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I take your point about the fact it's a tables match, and so sometimes it looks very, very choreographed and it's very slow as they're on the tables and slowly getting up off them as they're setting up the spots. And I think that the problem there is accentuated in the Performance Center because they seem to be tight for space. So there wasn't as many moments where tables were set up or they're nearly going through. Having said that, look, it was a pretty chaotic opener. You got the build up to the Big E spear on Cesaro, and I thought the end looked really good with Cesaro powerbombing Kingston through that table. So I felt that actually, in terms of drawing you into the pay-per-view, that match was far from a horror show and was pretty good. And I also like the way they're building Cesaro and Nakamura as these overlooked competitors who just want their time to shine, which I don't know if the WWE is trying to be really meta there, but of course that's completely true, but on a whole other level. So for me, it was pretty good. I quite enjoyed it. I like tables matches. I like all the superstars that are involved in there. They're legitimate stars, both collectively and individually. What would you be changing? What would you be rebooking?
I think you touched on something there, which was not only done in this match, but it's done in a lot of other matches, and you see it in a lot of recent PPVs, especially in WWE. There was a moment when Cesaro, who had only received 3 or 4 punches or whatever and was just lying on the table, all the while Kofi and Big E are setting up a big spot, which actually when you deliver the spot, you like from a athletic or acrobatic standpoint, actually looks really cool. Mm-hmm. The point is, from a wrestling perspective, is that Cesaro is just lying on a table having been punched lightly 3 times for about 45 seconds. And so it just looks silly. And you see that a lot when you see him trying to execute moves off the top rope, or if someone's just sort of stood by the barricade on the side waiting to be like pushed through into the Perspex glass. And he's, with the exception of maybe Rollins, who's like quite quick in his execution, I think that's just only something that looks a bit crap, and that's only accentuated when you have these gimmick matches.
Fair enough. I mean, maybe you were looking for it more than I was. I didn't really see that. I just thought it was a fairly decent match, and even up to the point where they were celebrating at the end, going up to Michael Cole, and saying, "There you go, there's the title." I thought it worked well for what it was. I get the fact that the Performance Center is smaller, so a little bit more confined for space, but for me, that was a decent opener. And despite the fact what you're saying about that the matches there and the way they end. This is probably the one that ended the best of all the matches on the card, despite the sort of gimmicky nature that you're criticising.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're all about rebooking here, aren't we? So, I mean, I'm taking out that gimmick altogether. Like, there's enough talent in that ring to have a decent tag match and tell a decent story. Are you rebooking at all?
No, I liked it as it was. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it is Extreme Rules, which is supposed to be every match some sort of extreme, if tables matches are still extreme, gimmick. So I leave it as it is. I actually am even over with Nakamura and Cesaro as the champion. So for me, that match I'd leave it as it was.
Tables matches, or tables in general, a little bit overused now, aren't they?
I guess so. I don't know when they started or when the transition was to only one member of the team having to go through a table, because that does shorten the match and then lead to moments like you're talking about. Whereas actually, if you've got opportunity to put someone through a table, obviously twice someone can go through a table and the match keeps going, then actually that would increase the fluidity and the pace of the match.
Yeah.
So
a slight tangent here, but why not? Were there tag matches like an Attitude Era with the Dudleys and things where both members had to go through tables?
Yeah. I don't know when they've changed that. But it used to be both members of the team had to go through a table. So, they did. Didn't they talk about the rules at the begining?
Yes. So, which I quite enjoyed, because there's many, as we'll go on to talk about, other matches where you just had no idea what the rules were.
Yeah.
But at least they were specified here. Okay, so we then had MVP against Apollo Crews, or did we?
I think before that it was Bailey and Cross. Didn't they come out first, and then it was Apollo after that? Yeah, I think Bailey and Cross came out next. They had that promo before where they were hyping up Cross, saying, you can do it, you'll be good,
right,
you'll be successful. And then she came out. What do you think of that match?
Enjoyed it. As I've said before, I'm one of Bailey's biggest fans. I think she's arguably the best female talent on the roster at the moment, in terms of moveset, look, gimmick, talker. She's had that title for what? Can't be far off a year now, 250 odd days, I think Michael Cole was quoting. So she's going to struggle to have a bad match. And Nikki Cross has come on a lot. Just watching her in the opening exchanges, Bailey was selling her really well. She's now developed some decent suplex. She can German suplex quite well. She's a net breaker off the apron. Bailey sold it well. So the match actually had a really nice flow to it. Told a decent story.
Yeah. That's a good shout, actually. I agree with you. I was really surprised how much offense Cross actually got in. I thought it might be a bit of a squash, but she got loads of early offense and was rapid in doing so. She had a couple of near falls up to the bit where she does a crossbody off the turnbuckle. So, actually, as the match was progressing, I was thinking Cross is going to win this here. This will be decent. She'll be a good champion, and then it will change the total dynamic of what's going on. So I guess that's what you want from the storytelling of the match. You want to believe that someone could win. And to your point about the women as well, it actually felt like it's starting to feel like a bigger occasion when you think that Bliss is at ringside and she's a 5 times champion. Banks is at ringside and she's a 7 times champion. Both of them have competed in Money in the Bank. Bliss has won Money in the Bank and Elimination Chamber. Banks has been in Iron Man and main evented Hell in a Cell with Charlotte. So actually, when you've got them at ringside and you've got good storytelling in the ring with Cross and Bailey, as you say, who's on an excellent run, then actually the match itself takes on a real sense of importance and really feels like, deserves a high, valid position on the card. So all the way through the match, I thought it was really good until you got to the end, which I just didn't understand.
Before you get to the end, I think you add to that is that actually now they've got a few options in terms of where you go from here, because we're still waiting for the payoff with Bailey and Banks and their feud. And let's assume that happens. you could easily book Nikki Cross to feud with Alexa Bliss, been best friends for however long. Nikki Cross can clearly work. Obviously, Bliss can. So there's potential money in that, and they don't necessarily need to have that title either. They could still work a decent program.
Yeah,
just throwaway matches on SmackDown.
And the way they're telling the story with Bayley and Banks, actually, you could see the fight happening at SummerSlam, but equally, they could hold it off until next year's WrestleMania. They've really booked it so well that they've got lots of flexibility in. Maybe both of them will have the title, the individual titles. Maybe neither of them will have the titles, and there's a lot they can do there. So yeah, agree.
Will they do it though? Big question.
When will they do it? I guess. But they didn't. There was no turn at the end of the match. Banks and Bayley didn't turn each other in this match.
Yeah. So the ending, you were about to say.
Well, I just again, this is the feature of the pay-per-view. Really, the match is in the ring, pretty decent, and then you get to the end, and it's just flat. It's just a dud, and she essentially Bayley gets Banks or Bayley or someone hits our friend Nikki Cross in the stomach with a ring. That's essentially what happens, and it's not knuckle dust to the face. It's what Sasha Banks wears on her hand, and Cole actually describes it in commentary as, obviously bigging it up. She's hit her with that thing she wears on her hand. Do you mean a ring, Cole? But obviously he can't say a ring because that'd be a ridiculous way to end the match for Cross to be hit in the stomach with a ring, and then that sort of inhibit her so that she lost the match. So it didn't make sense because that wouldn't hinder her to the extent that it did, and it was a really poor way to end the match. Given
she did hit a finisher as well, though, didn't she?
Yeah, that's true. But it came after that.
Yes.
After Cross was in pain from being tapped in the stomach with a ring, which it didn't make sense. And then for some reason the camera panned to it after the match as though it was something really important. And it's just a shame to throw the match away like that at the end.
The second point being is that there should be no scenario where a top tier talent like Bayley needs to take a foreign object to someone that's beneath her to beat her. In some ways, it discredits her a little.
Yeah, and like you're saying, probably Bayley is maybe the top talent at the moment. There's no Charlotte, there's no Lynch. She's got the women's title. She's got the tag title. So maybe she's the top talent. And what are you saying there? That she's having to resort to heelish tactics against someone that actually she should be.
Well, heelish tactics is fine, but I mean, what she's having to resort to is having to use foreign objects because she can't beat her with a moveset.
Yeah, and not a proper foreign object, right? If she decided to use a kendo stick or something, you'd be okay, fine. But actually, she's used a ring.
Yeah,
that spells out the word boss. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the end of the match was a shame that the end of the match went like that because it felt like a big deal and Cross was building well in the match. Probably not likely to win, but just to end it like that, it just feels flat.
Also kills any kind of program, doesn't it? I know we're talking about Bliss and Cross having a program, but if those two are going to go again, where can you go with that?
Yeah, it's a good point. Unless Alexa Bliss now comes into the equation, maybe.
Yeah. So rebooking?
Just that ending, I think for me. I don't mind her using heelish tactics to win, although I take your point about her being above Cross, Bayley being above Cross in the pecking order. If you're going to end like that, have something decisive and a beatdown so that Bayley and Banks at least look. Just change that ending. Just change that ending for me. You?
Similar. I can't disagree on this occasion.
That's all right. You don't have to. And then you've got MVP coming out to coronate himself with the US title.
Right. So this passed me by a little bit, but I think I've got the gist.
Yeah. Well, so it was supposed to be a match with Apollo Crews, but then Apollo Crews never showed up. Neither did any officials. MVP just walked to the ring with Lashley, took the title, crowned himself, and said that by forfeit he was the US champion.
What are we saying here? That Crews is isolating?
Well, no one actually knows at the moment, but they tried to put out some angle that Lashley had injured Crews on TV weeks ago, which clearly felt like it was something they were trying to put together quickly in hindsight. But, then MVP just walked to the ring without a referee. So he just then took the title. And I sort of thought, well, why don't Lashley take the title there? Why does MP have to? If you can just take the title, why don't you do that? And again, it was a bit of a hallmark of the pay-per-view that what was the end of this bit here? What was going on? Why did it have to rush through like that? I guess what you might say is, and again, I think this is a hallmark of the pay-per-view, it depends what happens next. Does Cruz come back and fight for that title? What does MVP do with that title? And you can only really judge the quality of that, or the quality of that moment on the pay-per-view in the longer term. But you're expecting Cruz and MVP to have a match, and they didn't.
I think it just looks slightly off because clearly Lashley is the money superstar there. And it works well to have him with MVP because he's a decent mouthpiece.
Yeah.
So they work well together, but you don't want the belt on the mouthpiece. You want the belt on the legit guy.
Exactly. Yeah. Unless Lashley's going after something a bit more, but unless Lashley's going after the heavyweight title, but he's out the heavyweight title picture. So
if that is the case, that hasn't been made clear.
It doesn't really make sense. Well, MVP apparently was coming back very much to retire. He wasn't expecting to be involved in sort of in front of house and in ring, but apparently they've just been so impressed with his work that he's gone front of house, and his work is really good. On Raw, spoiler here, but Shelton Benjamin turns up.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Wins the 24/7 title, and suddenly you've got a faction there developing its.
What they call themselves, the Hurt Business.
The Hurt Business. That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's excellent with the three of them, and maybe Cruz comes to join them. I don't know, but you can see that working. It's just on a pay-per-view, and I know that the business is different to how it was, but you build to a pay-per-view, and then MVP just comes and take the title, and it doesn't make sense how he's taking the title. I do wonder actually if that's part of the issue, that Raw doesn't have any sort of authority figure. So who is booking these matches? Who is organising this stuff? I know Stephanie turned up on Raw very briefly, but it almost seems like you could just do whatever you want as a superstar, which we'll go on to talk about further, I expect, later.
I'm full circle there, haven't we, from authority figures?
Yeah. But it could be like a William Regal type character, right? Not a sort of Triple H, Stephanie, evil booker, but just someone who's a general manager who you go to and say, can you book some matches for us? But it didn't really make sense, that MVP stuff.
I guess they tried that with Kurt Angle and it didn't really work, did it? Whether it was just because it was Angle.
Maybe
it's like a babyface authority figure.
Yeah. But certainly it left the Apollo Crews Mysterio. He's coming next. Apollo Crews MVP left it a bit confused.
Yeah, would agree.
Lack of sense.
I would agree, and we're digressing slightly here, but rebooking.
Look, if you can't have a match, then don't have it on the card.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Fair. Yeah. I'll just put the belt on Lashley. MVP comes out. Hey, Apollo Crews is missing for whatever reason. This is my guy. He's having the title. Suddenly, legit heat.
Yeah, and then everyone's sort of fighting Lashley to get the belt back off.
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes more sense, especially if Lashley's not doing anything in the heavyweight picture, which he isn't.
Yeah. Okay, so next up we had Seth Rollins against Rey Mysterio, where the winner would be declared once an eye had been extracted. So we just want to let that sort of sink in for a minute, or maybe not sink in, as the case may be.
Sink out, yeah. An eye for an eye match, which in the run up to it, Rollins said, "I thought this was going to be metaphorical, but he actually means it. We have to take out the other person's eye." Maybe that's why it was a horror show. I don't know. What did you make of the match?
I just doesn't make any sense. Just don't really get it on many levels. So firstly, Rollins, probably my favorite talent on the roster, him and Bailey. Clearly fantastic worker, like amazing skill set, good on the mic, yet he's reduced to near falls of trying to take someone's eye out. Rey Mysterio, I don't really enjoy Lucha style, not least sort of the counter moves and the flips and stuff that Mysterio does. So when you concoct that all together, what are we actually watching here? Nothing that made a lot of sense the whole time, and just sort of sat there waiting for it to be over.
Yeah,
I'm just looking at my notes. From my notes, this had the shortest amount that I've got on any match. A lot of near falls that didn't make any sense. I wrote at one point, "This is crap."
Well,
I don't know what else to write.
I think I largely agree, but there's some nuance disagreement in what I would say. In that, I agree with you. WWE's it just booked itself into a corner with this one. I have to say, not surprisingly, when they turned up and it wasn't a cinematic match, instantly my hopes were raised that they're actually having a match and not some sort of weird cinema type stuff, which would have been
Was it a
awful.
cinema match though? Like with the gimmick eye?
Well, but it wasn't a cinematic as in they were backstage somewhere doing that.
Right.
Like it was an actual wrestling match rather than some sort of weird walking around a neighborhood, jumping out on each other with whatever pliers or something. But it didn't really elevate the match, right? This eye for eye stuff. I mean, people were talking about it, but mostly just to pan it and say this is ridiculous. Whereas the greatest wrestling match ever actually elevated what Orton and Edge did. This just sort of put them into a corner. And I agree with you. It slowed the match because rather than having a wrestling match or even a no disqualification match, they kept stopping to do weird things like push a chair into someone's eye or break a kendo stick and run someone into it. So that didn't really work. I take your point about how it slowed and stopped the quality of the match. And actually that's epitomized by the reverse when there was a really lovely sequence which built to a frog splash. And then there was a stomp and a tornado DVT. And I think it ended with Mysterio throwing Rollins into the barricade or the perspex. And that sequence there was really good because they just sort of ignored the gimmick and got together and did some great wrestling. And I disagree with you on Mysterio. I think he's fantastic and still doing great work despite his age. So the two of them, really, you just want to get them in the ring and let them fight and let the rest of the story just sort of go in the background. And so I agree that the stipulation sort of hurt the match. However, it wasn't as bad as it was shaping up to be in the weeks preceding it.
Yeah, the build.
Yeah.
How else can you build a match like that, though? There's no blueprint. It hasn't been done before, right or wrongly. And I'm guessing Rollins and Mysterio didn't really know themselves.
Exactly
how to approach a match like that.
I think there must be some in-jokes going around because even in the commentary, one of them, and I can't remember which one it was, said, "I cannot believe what we're about to witness. Surreal that we're actually going through with this." So obviously, to me, that sounds like they're actually legitimately saying that, and obviously it fits the story. And later on, Samoa Joe, in his deadpan commentator's way, said, as someone tried to extract an eye with whatever method they were doing at the time, pliers or whatever, Joe said, "Sadly, it's not enough. It's not over." So I think probably the stars are with you that this is ridiculous and they're messing around as well.
Samoa Joe's money on commentary, isn't he?
He's very good. I don't know why he's not wrestling if he's got a concussion or head injury. What I like about him on commentary is that when everyone else panics and disappears, he still sits there because he's a wrestler. So he I can still choke you out or do whatever you want it. So I'm not going to be scared of you, which I quite like. But the worst part of the match, despite the gimmick, they sort of did all right in spite of themselves or in spite of what they were left with, but was the end again. The end just wasn't the payoff that you want for a Rollins or a Mysterio, and it wasn't the payoff even given the gimmick. It didn't still do what it was supposed to do.
Give me credit. They saw it through for what the match was actually supposed to be. So if they had a turn around and said, okay, an eye for an eye match, you have to extract an eye, and then the ending was something other than that, we would have been sat here slagging that off as well.
I guess so.
So at least they saw it through. My biggest criticism was like, if you're actually going to see that through in the way that they did and use a gimmick eye or whatever, at least have Rollins draw some heat on it rather than have a babyface reaction of what might be a normal humane reaction of seeing that at ringside and being sick or whatever. Just have him try and continue beating him up and have people hold him back, have Murphy come out and hold him back or whatever. He could have drawn so much heat.
Aleister Black was someone who just wasn't on the card, right? And
yeah.
Been feuding with them.
It just could have been a good opportunity to draw so much more heat.
Yeah.
What would Nash do?
I was certainly glad. Yeah, he'd definitely book heat. I was certainly glad that because it wasn't cinematic, there wasn't some ridiculous eyeball rolling all over the place. Although apparently Vince, when they filmed it, Vince had something like that happening, and Vince himself decided that it wasn't very good, which is a bit ridiculous. Like if Vince is saying it must have been awful, so they cut that bit out. I don't really know why. I agree with you. Why is Rollins being sick? And the other thing I would say is that Mysterio already lost his eye in that way a few weeks back. So it wasn't like the payoff took the match in any further than what already happened. And then, of course, like Rollins throwing up, I just didn't really care for it. So again, I don't think the match was that great, although given the context they were given, I thought they did an okay job. It's just the ending again, just let it down.
How are we rebooking that? Ditching the gimmick eye? You want to bring the eyeball rolling back?
No. I'll let that one roll away. I just think you can just have an Extreme Rules match. It's that Extreme Rule. Everything doesn't have a slightly different focus. Just let them have an Extreme Rule match where they beat the hell out of each other, and whoever gets the pin wins. And the end has to, if that's the end of their feud, which it seems to be, looking at Raw, the end of the feud is supposed to be the climax. And actually, it was just the same as they'd done before. So I would change that ending to make it much more meaningful, much bigger.
Just jumping ahead of the game here, in terms of our podcast at least. So obviously Vince is concerned about ratings and things. And it seems like some of these endings have been set up just to continue feuds on TV. So you've now got feuds or matches which are left open-ended. Is that just because they can continue it on Raw the next night or get you to tune into Raw the next night, which is fine because obviously that's what the point of the product. I want you to keep tuning in. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not averse to that.
Yeah, to the detriment of the PPV.
Yeah, I'm not averse to them having, the pay-per-view doesn't have to be the dead end and the full stop, and then the next night there's a whole new story. Like I think it can roll on and continue, and that's what we've seen with Banks and Bayley, which is the best story going around at the moment in WWE probably. So it doesn't have to just sort of stop dead and now it's a new program. I think it's good that there are those links, but if you're going to do that, you want to make sure that every single match doesn't end in a similar way, so that the pay-per-view counts for nothing. That would be what I would say. I don't mind the intention. I just think the implementation wasn't quite there.
Agree. Right, should we move on?
Yeah,
lots to get through here.
Asuka Banks.
Asuka against Banks. Now we're talking. Mostly.
Why is that?
Well, I was about to say for the first time, maybe for the second time this PPV, you actually had an actual wrestling match. Two legit, no pun intended, two legit competitors who are experienced enough, like know each other, put on a decent match. You had genuine interest and you genuinely didn't know who was going to win.
Yeah.
They pieced it together very well. A lot of mat-based stuff, submissions, which I know you love, backwards and forwards. You could tell that they were taking it turns to like lead match or lead different phases of it, which is something which is just a product of the Performance Center right now. There's no crowd. You can almost hear them calling it a lot of the time.
Yes.
And you could tell that those two just knew what they were doing. And that just made for an interesting watch, at least until we got to the ending. Yeah,
again, that sort of almost just hit repeat. But I agree. I think it was the best match on the card, and it was well paced with good phases. I thought actually a few times it lacked a bit of fluidity, but I think actually maybe that enhanced it. So I was thinking about there was a sunset flip into an armbar that felt a bit wooden, but actually that gave it a much different feel to the smoothness and the quickness that we see in NXT, where they just flow from move to move. It probably made the match, better. I thought Banks was largely in control, which was interesting, given Asuka's the champion. But
heel, though, isn't she?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but I thought Asuka might get in a bit more offense. But on the apron and outside, and off the turnbuckle, we got a frog splash, superplex reversal, and Asuka dropping Banks with a double knee. So there were some good spots in there. Obviously, I enjoyed. So the match was excellent, going back and forth. Really highlighted Asuka, who's one of the top wrestlers in the company. Really highlighted Banks and the storyline that's continuing with Banks and Bayley and their pursuit for gold and the golden role models. But then it just got to the end. It's
interesting how it's come together, isn't it? Because Asuka's only just got that title, having picked it up from Becky, who dropped it. So on the one hand, if she's going to have matches like that and you kind of know she's over, let's have her keep the title. It'd be a fairly short, innocuous reign if she lost it now. But on the other hand, it just builds everything. If Sasha wins, it just builds everything nicely, doesn't it? With those two having all the belts.
Yeah, if they want to go really long with the, I mean, I'm not bothered about Asuka dropping it, to be honest. She only really got it because obviously Becky was off pregnant. But I'll be happy if they really want to go long term. they could do where have both Banks and Bailey have the titles and the tag titles, and then they could have Bailey lose it so that Banks has got it and Bailey hasn't, which is a role reversal of where they are currently, so that they could really string it out. So I wouldn't mind if I'd probably prefer if Asuka dropped the title to Banks. It's just, I mean, she hasn't dropped the title, but the way the match ended, it's just a bit farcical, especially given the quality of in-ring performance. The difference between the two was just so great that it just undermined what had happened before.
So our good friend Dave Meltzer's reporting that Vince changed his mind last minute, and that's why the end looked slightly screwy. It's just a little bit of a shame, isn't it? Because there's so many good ways they could have ended that match, and it's fair enough if they don't want to have one or the other going over clean.
But it was just so exaggerated. So they have a fight. There's a fight outside the ring. Then there's the green mist and the ref's down. Then Bailey just puts on the title. The referee's shirt. Then she counts the pin. I mean, to be fair, Bliss was booking matches on SmackDown the week before, so maybe everyone just books their own stuff now because, you know, there's no authority for figures. You just do what you want. But
AEW style.
The ending was just so poor, given how much of a story they told in the ring. Again, there's a bit of context in that, and like you're talking about pay-per-views to Raw and SmackDown. In the longer term, the quality of that match will be better contextualized when we know what happens next. So, you know, it depends on that and that sets up. But the ending was just stupid. Presumably Banks isn't the champion, and they said she wasn't the champion on Raw following. But and the feud could continue. But why in the match like that? It's just ridiculous. Who won the match? Who actually won the match? Is it still going on? Like, has someone been disqualified? Wow.
Yeah. Well, you buy in, don't you? You're led to believe the heels put on a screwy move and they get away with the title.
Yeah. Although Asuka, you know, she was the one hitting the green mist. So yeah. Who's the real heel there? Come on.
I tell you what, that ref's in decent shape, isn't
he? yeah. Should have been able to get up quicker though and count that pin. Yeah. So how would you rebook that? The ending again?
Yeah. I think on balance, I'd have Banks win that title. I'm down with a little bit of interference from Bailey. That actually makes sense to have the interference, even if it is a foreign object. You've got legit contender in Asuka. They are the heels, so it makes sense to have them use underhand tactics to win. Mm-hmm. So I'd have no problem with Banks going over there, and as you say, sets up a program going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. So then the final title match on the card was
final match.
Well, the other one is not a match.
Right. I think the WWE website will say otherwise.
McIntyre Ziggler for the heavyweight title. Yeah. That's the final match on the card.
Yeah. My first note was, at least we knew the rules. Ziggler comes out and actually explains the stipulation, which is a bit of a break from the norm because they usually are declaring stipulations on Raw the week before, right? And here we actually on the PPV, Ziggler states his stipulation,
which was part of the story, right? Ziggler trying to get one over on McIntyre and readdress the imbalance between them.
Right, which is the only way they could have gone with this match because my fundamental problem was just never expected Ziggler to win. So the only way you can legitimately believe he might win is to massively stack the deck against McIntyre, which they did with all of the different stipulations.
Yeah. And if you think about the stipulations, what else could he have stipulated? So I mean, if they're having a steel cage or what, it doesn't really. Actually, the stipulation, although I was 50-50 on it to start with, if you think about the other stipulations, people were saying that McIntyre has to get a 10 count to win, or McIntyre can't use the Claymore. Like actually, although the stipulation seems a bit off or doesn't feel like it might not feel like it definitely work, it actually did give Ziggler a real sense of momentum and opportunity in the match. And sort of thinking back to your point about New Day earlier, it meant that they had to work in a slightly different way, so it wasn't just a normal Extreme Rules match. Ziggler was Extreme Rules. McIntyre had to avoid that, otherwise he'd lose the title. So it did have that element of jeopardy in there as well, which I think made for a pretty decent match.
Mm. Yeah, I think Ziggler, one of the best workers, isn't he? Like sells so well. Like that's one of those turnbuckle bumps he takes and things like.
Yeah,
Oh my
McIntyre's
God.
power moves look really, really good. That reverse Alabama, he was smashing around, and again, throws you into the perspex. So that's the new, that's the new super kick, throwing people into the perspex. But yeah, no, even from the bit where McIntyre was going to suplex Ziggler into the table, and then he had to stop because obviously he'd get disqualified.
Yeah.
And they go straight into the ring, and Ziggler gives him a massive low blow.
Yeah.
Actually, that worked for me in terms of, oh yeah, okay, there's a. I mean, you didn't really believe it, but there's a small bit of jeopardy here, and maybe McIntyre will lose.
That McIntyre sold the stipulation quite well, like some of his facial expressions and the way he was, as you say, rethinking some of his moves.
Yeah.
So they did the best with what they had.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fine. The difficulty I have with, like you're saying, is that Ziggler, you just don't believe he's going to be the champion, although, you know, he has the credentials and the quality. Just the way he's booked in advance, you don't think he's going to be the champion. And the issue they have with McIntyre is that he's starting to look so dominant, and obviously that's probably setting him up for SummerSlam. But he's starting to look so dominant. You know, who's ever going to beat him? How is anyone ever going to beat him? And on that note, that's why I think again the end was a little bit off, because Ziggler just decided to chuck all the chairs out the ring. McIntyre's on the floor, gets up, Claymore 1, 2, 3. Like, well, it doesn't really make sense that Ziggler's just suddenly given all that stuff up and just hit with the Claymore. I think it just added to the idea, rather than making McIntyre look have a little bit area of weakness, which, you know, you need him to have, otherwise, you know, the match is all like foregone conclusions. It just again made McIntyre look like an unbelievable giant and a beast. So I would have preferred that ending to be a little bit different, just in terms of how they let it continue, and they made Ziggler look like he had a little bit more chance of one just throwing it away there at the end. But now I'm waffling, so I'll shut up.
Yeah, I think what we really need is a decent McIntyre program. Since he's had that title, I think he's held the title pretty well in terms of his being the locker room leader, if you will.
Yeah.
But what he really needs now is a program stretched out over a few matches, maybe starting at SummerSlam. It's got to be Randy Orton, isn't it?
Probably, yeah. It looks like it's going to be Randy Orton. Although no one will be watching SummerSlam if the ratings, which I know we'll talk about later, for his match against Big Show is anything to go by. I suppose McIntyre, he might be benefiting from no crowds, to be honest, because he has an element of Roman Reigns about him. This big, solid, strong, hard to beat guy, looks good, like, tall, good looking, all that stuff. Like, actually, maybe having no crowds means that he can just do what he wants rather than have to worry about reactions. So, yeah. But in terms of rebooking, let's just change the end of that match. So it gives makes Ziggler look a little bit less weak.
Okay. Right. So the main event.
Yeah.
Braun Strowman against Bray Wyatt in a non-title match.
In a swamp.
I mean, do you want to kick off?
No, right. So it's not a match, first of all. It's not a match. I'm not going to refer to it as a match. Nothing about it is a match. You say it's non-title. Why is the main event of a pay-per-view non-title when you've got 3 heavyweight titles, 2 women's and the Raw being contested? So why does this go above them? Why is it non-title? Why can't this be for the title? Is it because it's such a ridiculous thing to have in the first place? They don't want it to be a title. And I think as well, you need to start differentiating out that this isn't a cinematic match. So the cinematic matches are, you know, Orton Edge, Cole Dream, that sort of stuff, and the Boneyard match if you want, because, you know, it's a fight and it's got an ending. But this isn't a cinematic match. This is just, it's just cinema. It's just cinematic. It's closer to a promo than a match, and even accounting for all that stuff, it just doesn't make any sense, and it's total rubbish. It would be the worst thing probably I've seen in WWE, except that on the previous pay-per-view they had the Viking Raiders and the Street Profits do their rubbish. But make no mistake about it, this swamp event thing was absolutely abysmal, and I can't be convinced otherwise, and you must agree, surely.
What about if you just watch it for what it is and you just appreciate its artistic creation for having 2 guys in a dark outdoor environment testing new ground unseen kind of angles.
Yeah, I'm sure you're winding me up because it's just an incoherent mess. It's just an absolute. I thought it was dumb when it were. I mean, so we tweeted out 25 questions that we had about about this match, and everything from why is it in a swamp, and why is Wyatt back after and chasing Strowman 3 years after Wyatt family collapsed, to why are they now following this, having released the other members. Like, none of it makes sense on a match level. It's not a match, but on an interaction level. It doesn't make on a broader storyline WWE level. Like, it's done when they're flicking to the animals. I didn't really get what was going on when Strowman was sort of walking along and seeing a picture of an alligator. But then it flicked to Bray in the funhouse. So that made it even more nonsensical because, does that mean Bray's watching the match? Does that mean Bray Wyatt is also the Bray Wyatt in the funhouse? They're supposed to be fighting. What's going on? Is it all in Strowman's head? And then it just got gradually worse until he was fighting himself with a shovel. So why is a shovel a weapon of choice? And is he actually fighting? I mean, have they been watching Star Wars again? And it's they're on Dagobah. Like, look, what doesn't make any sense? Does he actually see himself, or does he not see himself? And at what point is reality, and what point is it hallucinations? Like, it just how can you buy into that? And that's the beginning part of the match, and it just goes downhill from there.
It's quite good the way they weaved in the Alexa Bliss stuff, though, wasn't it?
Well, it doesn't make sense either, because he got bitten by a snake. or did he get bitten by a snake? I don't know. It's like someone brought him a snake. I mean, who are all those people he was fighting? Are they Wyatt family members? And why in that swamp? Anyway, he gets bitten by the snake. Then he fights a man who gets set on fire despite the fact he's nowhere near the fire. And then, as you say, Alexa Bliss turns up. But is that because he's been bitten by a snake and he's hallucinating, or has he not been bitten by a snake and he's seen that? And why is she Sister Abigail? Is that a projection of his fears? Because if it's a projection of his fears, that's the Fiend, not Wyatt. So, like, it doesn't until eventually the Fiend turns up at the end, and we're no further forward anyway, because is the match still going on? Who's won the match? How do you win a swap match? You're talking about the rules. What are the rules for a swap match? Does anyone know? Like, and is the match still going on? What's happened to Braun and Strowman? Are we going to find out on SmackDown? What's happened to Bray Wyatt? Because he was trying to get out of the water, and then the Fiend pulled him back in and emerged. It just doesn't make any sense in any way. So then, okay, I hear what you're saying. Let's try and get rid of the sense and just look at it for its artistic nature. But I mean, it's in the context of storytelling and a small piece of cinema. I mean, you can say that the camera angles are good and stuff if you want, but even the acting of the people fighting, the guy that gets set on fire, is all rubbish. So I just can't be convinced. Surely you're winding me up. You can't be convinced that in any way this match does anything for anybody at all.
I'm just trying to see the positives. I mean, what do you think Strowman thinks of it? I mean, to some degree, you could argue maybe Wyatt thinks that this kind of adds to his multiple personas. But what does Strowman think of, like, just taking part in this? I mean, look, he's a legit big guy. He's in mostly incredible shape, and for his size, he can do amazing things in the ring. Yet there he is trying to swim.
Yeah, and also, I mean, how deep is this swamp? And how long can they hold their breath for? It's just all rubbish. I mean, no one's really explained why Wyatt is back, to take your point. Why is he back, and where's he been? And why is he targeting Strowman 3 years after he's left the Wyatt family? It just doesn't make any sense. Cole was trying to sell the match, of course, because that's his job. But, I mean, he couldn't sell the match because it's in a swamp in 2020, and they were lasting the Wyatts in 2017. And then, Wyatt's mystique and stuff. And I know he was always a bit of a babbling cult leader when he was Bray Wyatt, but he said something about not being dead or already being dead, and his body, he was in his body, but he wasn't controlling it. What's he talking about? It's just incoherent storytelling. And it takes too much guesswork to make it work on behalf of the viewer. Like, is it all hallucination? Is part of it hallucination? What's hallucination? Are they really there? And you can pretend it's deep and meaningful and that, it's being overlooked or you don't understand it. But the reality is it makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. And I find it really hard. I mean, have you seen some of the ways people have been trying to justify it? is ridiculous. It's just rubbish.
You got anything else to add on that?
Well, drop by our Twitter, Rebooked, and check out the 25 questions, which include everything from like what is actually happening into the match to the surrounding stuff around it. I've got one more thing to add. I just thought thinking about here is that maybe they're after these cinematic matches because everyone went so over the top about the Boneyard, which we'll talk about later, and I've changed my view on it slightly, but the Boneyard and the Funhouse match at WrestleMania, because people were so positive about them when they were just bang average at best, it's almost like they've created this idea that cinematic matches are great, and so we've got to keep having these cinematic matches, and we've got to keep saying they're great. Bleacher Report, I've got this written down somewhere, let me find it. This is what Bleacher Report said about the match. So there's only one person, I don't know who it was, but this is what they said. I'm quoting now.
Bleacher Report is one person.
Well, this is only one person's view. It doesn't represent all
Right.
the Bleacher Report. And I'm saying that because they should be ashamed if it does, for an organisation like them to come out with something like this. This is what they said. They talk about cinematic matches and this swamp match. They can only be enjoyed if you suspend your disbelief, refuse to criticise it as a legitimate, refuse to criticise it as it is as a legitimate television show or film, and judge it based on the criteria of a regular professional wrestling vignette. And that is just total rubbish, and I can't believe that is what you are. Like, they're talking about suspending disbelief. We're wrestling fans, so we watch scripted promos and scripted fights in a theatrical storyline. So we're pretty good at suspending disbelief. So don't worry about that. But why should you refuse to criticise it as a legitimate television show or film? That's what it is. So you're like, this is what we're going to give you, but don't criticise it for that. You have to think about it as something else, even if it doesn't make any sense. So what you're refusing to criticise it based on the fact it's legitimate television, and you shouldn't criticise it as legitimate television. Like, where else would you make that sort of claim? It's ridiculous. But like, let's take all that out and let's just say it is a vignette. It's supposed to be a wrestling match. It's called a swamp fight.
It's not a match.
It's not a match, exactly. So what are they talking about? It was total rubbish. It doesn't do anything for anyone. Like you said, Strowman, Wyatt, the production team, Triple H, Vince McMahon, me, you, fans. Like, it's just total rubbish. It's just total rubbish. And I would say, unquestionably, it's the second worst cinematic event there's ever been. And that's only because the other one was so ridiculous. And this one had the occasional Wyatt versus Strowman. They barely even fought. The rest of the pay-per-view had good wrestling and bad endings. This was just a bad ending to the entire pay-per-view. And
So in summary, that Bleacher story sounds like a work, to be honest.
I suppose they gave it an A though. They said fantastic. I don't know.
Summary for the PPV?
Summary for the pay-per-view. Okay, so I think we said at the beginning, there's three parts. There's the in-ring matches, and I actually think that in terms of in-ring matches, the wrestling was pretty good, and the wrestlers did a good job, although they're being let down behind the scenes by the ending of the matches, which I think was a problem for all of the matches. I think that the context of the pay-per-view, I think it was probably better than Mania, Money in the Bank. When I say better, I enjoyed it more than Mania, Money in the Bank, and Backlash. Context in the long term, we have to find out whether how the stories develop to really understand the pay-per-view in the long term in terms of quality. So match is good, end the match is poor. Think about the long-term context, and the swamp thing at the end is just something else. Delete.
Positive spin from Spoiler. I enjoyed this PPV more than anything since and including WrestleMania. The natural curve of storyline was just a little bit more interesting in most cases, and it's built up enough intrigue going forward. I can't remember being legitimately interested and invested in a match in that Asuka Banks for a long while. Maybe the Bryan Styles IC match on SmackDown, but on PPV, I think this was the best for a while. And I'll keep in context your point at the start of the episode saying about maybe they have lowered the bar, but the bar is the bar, and that's how we have to judge it.
Yeah.
I think it was okay for what it was.
Yeah, and actually, I've seen the entirety of Raw following, and I actually thought that was better as well. So maybe there's a slight upturn here, but let's not get too excited, because also one of the things we've seen is one of the worst things ever on that pay-per-view. So,
shall we move on?
Yeah, I'll leave it there. Stop crying.
Episode 4, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Right, section 2. We're looking to get our finger on the pulse. And what better way than to discuss the Wednesday Night Wars, as they are so called, that's going on at the moment. So that's WWE's NXT developmental brand, which airs on Wednesday nights, as does AEW's Dynamite, under various different guises, as we're about to talk about. So with 2 rival wrestling shows airing on the same night, it has shades of the famous Monday Night Wars from 20 years ago. So we thought we'd take a look at it and ask the question: who is winning the Wednesday Night Wars? How do you judge who's winning the Wednesday Night Wars? So we've come up with some criteria. We're going to have our own debate. Be interesting to see if anyone else has any alternative views at Rebooked on Twitter. So ratings seems to be the hottest point of debate for these shows, rightly or wrongly. And certain senior members within AEW have been tweeting out and apparently shooting on various different haters that are suggesting that AEW's numbers are down overall, but it doesn't matter because in specific demographics, their ratings are better than NXT. On the 15th of July, NXT actually was beaten by AEW considerably, 788,000 to 631 for NXT. That's in the US. So AEW might finally be doing something right. Andeve?
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I don't quite understand all this hype and nonsense around the ratings. So, I mean, I understand that that's where they get their, it's important to the networks and the shows and all that sort of stuff. But Jericho incorporated it into one of his promos, called himself the Demo God or the Demo King or the Champion, whatever. I don't really care enough to see it on TV like that as part of a promo. I'd rather him just do some decent stuff on the show and then the ratings come separately. Equally, like Khan tweets about it, saying that, how delighted he is with all this sort of stuff. I mean, yeah, fair enough. And then when you're talking about July the 15th, I think AEW won every quarter in terms of total viewers, and then it beat NXT in this 18-49 demo, and I don't really care. And I think, I wonder if it's a bit false anyway, because you're comparing AEW with NXT, and as good as NXT is, and I think the NXT takeover is the best pay-per-views, of the last WWE pay-per-views, certainly of the last 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, you're still talking about NXT WWE's third show against AEW, and Raw is plummeting and doing terrible numbers, but that same week it did 1.561. So even though, and that was massively down from, in 2017 it did 3 million, just over 3 million. So it's massively down, but who cares? Because your third show is in a war with, or ratings war with AEW, but your main shows are still drawing more than it. So I'm not really sure why people are so het up about it. I sort of wonder if it's an angle they're creating, and then you're sort of like, oh yeah, what's going on in the ratings? And then, everyone's suddenly talking about it. When actually, does anyone really care?
It's 100% an angle, isn't it? Because in the greater wide scheme of things, as you point out, these numbers are pale in comparison compared to WWE's main shows. And actually, even if you do just take the NXT and AEW numbers in isolation, they're totally interchangeable anyway. So on the 8th of July, which was the second week of the Great American Bash / Fyter Fest, NXT did more than AEW anyway. Ditto the week before, the first week of the 2-week PPV Great American Bash for WWE, Fyter Fest for AEW, 792,000 for NXT, 748,000 for AEW. That's according to Wrestling Observer. So the numbers are absolutely pale into comparison anyway, because they're just interchanging each week. So if we're saying the ratings don't matter, how do we judge these programs that, are going head to head each week? Yeah. They're now coming up with these titles, PPVs. Do you tentatively call it PPV? It's just a glorified house show, a glorified TV show that they're putting on in the same space each week. It's not like we're dedicating a Sunday night to a specific PPV. We've now just got Fyter Fest, which happens to be the same 2 hours as Dynamite would otherwise be.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's stupid. And just the last thing on those ratings is that in 2010, Impact moved to Monday nights, and they had a sort of rating style war against WWE. Going back to the Bischoff and his 83, and again with his 83, he's not talking about demos, is he? He's just talking about weeks he's winning. But because it was a similar cast on Impact as to when it was on WCW years earlier, they had a little ratings war. And when you look at the Impact ratings, they were on open at 1.5 million, but then they're all at sort of at 0.8, 0.9. Yet no one ever was really bothered about that in WWE. Yet for some reason, AEW, which is doing the same sort of numbers and lower, seems to be banging on about it. So yeah, like you say, then they're trying to get people to tune in by changing the names of the shows. But the name of the show only makes a difference if you change the content of the show, right? And look, it's led to some good stuff. We got to see Lee versus Cole versus Lee, because he was the champion at the time. They're both champions, weren't they? But a heavyweight champion. So you got to see that on free TV. I mean, that's great. But when you're changing the name of the show, you're not necessarily changing the content, and that's what really makes the difference, right? The content of the show, not the name and the branding. I have to say, I only dip into AEW every so often. When I hear there's something that others have said to watch, whereas I'm watching NXT a bit more frequently. When I'm turning into those NXT show, the AEW shows, I'm seeing stuff like Orange Juice being dropped on Jericho from Orange Cassidy, rubbish. Or Tyson doing some sort of angle that he did years ago in WWE, and so. You can talk about ratings and you can rebrand your show, but if the quality on the show is no good, which those two sections for me weren't, but they got a lot of discussion, then again, I'll come back to that. I don't really care. I just want to see some good matches. If I get to see Lee Cole good, but otherwise, who cares?
So I think that's three of our four main criteria, right? The actual ratings themselves, the PPV titles, and the in-ring action. And what should be happening in an ideal world is you've got these two big shows of Raw and SmackDown, but underneath this, you've got all this up and coming talent that's supported by so-called like veterans that can just elevate the wrestling business as a whole. But that isn't really happening at the moment, because in AEW, like from the top down, you've got Moxley, who was there, then he wasn't there because his wife tested positive for COVID, and then, which is ironic anyway, considering she's working for WWE. And so you had to scratch the title matches. You got the tags, you got stacks and stacks of tag teams, but their tag team champions are two guys which really should be competing in singles, in Adam Page and Kenny Omega. The women's division has been thrown off totally because their biggest star in the women's is injured long-term, Britt Baker.
Yeah.
And then they've just got a stack of mid-card guys that they pack out around the ring for extra fans, which just looks a bit silly. I think they should have Jake talking more as well, and Cody Rhodes' Arn Anderson.
Yeah.
They don't really do much or interfere in matches. Cody Rhodes is just having like match after match after match, looking like he's trying to get people over, but he just wins and squashes them every time. So the booking is a bit suspect. And it's a shame because there's so much potential. You obviously got JR on commentary, Tony Schiavone, Excalibur. It's a decent setup. The set looks really good, but the booking is just shoddy. And that's
why is that? Is it because AEW books in a different way to WWE and NXT?
Largely. There's no creative sat behind the scenes.
Just Jericho booking himself.
Jericho, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega,
So with the Stadium Stampede match, or that orange juice that came from the ceiling, is that Jericho booking that then?
Afraid so.
Yeah. Again, I mean, he can talk about his ratings demos and all that sort of stuff, but if you're putting rubbish like that on TV, then people aren't going to watch, are they?
He had a $7,000 jacket ruined.
I mean, yeah, just take a jacket off, get dry cleaned.
So, I mean, who's winning? How do we judge?
I mean, I don't know. I come back to it. I don't really care. I guess who's winning, you know, if you're getting to see good matches and if each show is pushing the other to do something better, then, you know, I guess the fans are winning, if that's not too corny an answer. But in terms of who's winning between the two, like, I don't know and I don't care. But ratings, demos, not really that interested. Who's got the better in-ring stuff? Probably NXT, is it?
There's some mid-card NXT guys coming up, which I've put on some decent matches. Damien Priest, have you seen any of him?
Yes, yeah, excellent.
Timmy Thatcher.
Yeah.
I had the match with Riddle.
Yeah.
In the pit match.
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose I don't really care who's winning, as long as there's decent shows. Who do you think's winning?
NXT. I think they're just putting on better matches, better produced, simple booking as well.
Yeah, and I think also the context, actually, let's not get too excited about these ratings and stuff. You know, like I said, Bischoff talks about his 83 weeks, but he's not talking about the 18 to 49 demo, and he's talking about 83 weeks winning. And also, let's keep these figures in comparison. They're less than Impact in 2010 when they were going head-to-head with Raw. So, and it's WWE's third show. So I don't know. I'm getting drawn into it, and I don't even care.
It's fun to talk about, though, isn't it?
Yeah, so you're saying WWE NXT is winning the Wednesday Night Wars?
They are, but they shouldn't be.
Oh,
they shouldn't be. So, okay, let's move on, shall we? Episode 4, Wrestling Rebooked, putting wrestling into submission. Last part of today's show, as always, is our review. And today we're going to review The Undertaker Last Ride, 5 episodes that have just finished airing on the WWE network, which all culminated in The Undertaker announcing his retirement from in-ring, at least, with WWE, which caused a bit of a stir across networks. Andeve, enjoy the show?
Yeah, I did. Interesting. You think he's retired?
That was the announcement.
Yeah, I don't know if it's. Don't know if he has or not. Did I enjoy the show? Yeah. I thought episode 1 was excellent. I thought episode 5 was excellent. I thought the 3 in the middle was classic WWE. They were sort of stringing out the show just for extra content, and it was almost like it was just trying to justify the awful booking decisions they'd made. Maybe I'll just start episode 1, just a couple of things that hit me about it, and then bounce through the next ones as well. So episode 1 was the build-up to WrestleMania 33 with Reigns, and actually that was fantastic because at this point, you know, we're now in a post-Undertaker kayfabe world. He's on TikTok apparently now and stuff like that. But at that point, we'd never had Undertaker breaking kayfabe, breaking his gimmick. So it was really interesting to see that stuff given the limited exposure. You could see the inner turmoil he has in that first episode because he's got the difficulty of being an athlete trying to retire, and we know how boxers and especially, but you know, many athletes struggle with retirement. So he's got that issue, but he's also a performer. So you know, in terms of like an actor and acting, so he's got the worst of both worlds in trying to leave it all behind and retire, which you can see he struggles with. I also thought a couple of quick points here. Level of injury, him hobbling and limping around and constantly trying to rehab to get back, that really hit me. They mentioned the synonymous nature of Undertaker and the streak at WrestleMania. And of course, yeah, that obviously now gone. But for years, that was another way that WrestleMania became elevated, and Undertaker was a huge part of that. Flair called him the greatest character or gimmick in wrestling. And then the final thing I just thought is it's interesting. Everyone talks about Vince and Brock and their selfish nature and do they care about the business? Yeah, it says at WrestleMania 30, they both followed him to the hospital while the show was still going on. So they were my key sort of moments that I remember from episode 1 or that I took away.
So, I mean, it's an interesting show, wasn't it? You're probably never going to get a show or a documentary like that again, because you haven't got another character in wrestling like the Undertaker. So
No.
you can't really draw. You could put together a 5-part series on Bret Hart, but it wouldn't really quite the same because you've got so many different layers of the Undertaker and Mark Calloway himself.
Yeah.
Interesting you're saying about his ability to be able to walk away as a performer and as an athlete. Why would that be any different from anyone else if we're saying that every other wrestler has some form of gimmick and has some form of theatrics in them?
Yeah, no. So I think it's just weighs more heavily on him. I think Edge, when he talked about his retirement, he said it was actually easy because it was just taken away from him. You're injured, you can't wrestle anymore. Oh right, okay. Well, I guess I do something else.
The Undertaker was injured.
But Edge was told he can't compete, whereas Undertaker's rehabbing to try and compete. Edge was like, "You're finished." And then, as another example, Shawn Michaels, when he retired, he said he retired with a lot left in the tank, but he was comfortable with it, and he wanted to see. Undertaker, for whatever reason, is weighing more heavily on him, and I don't know why that is, but it's quite clear to see in that first episode, and then over the subsequent ones, the turmoil that he has.
So I think it's more of a historical thing if you think about the Undertaker for his age to begin, and he's actually been living that gimmick since 1991 when Vince came up with it. Okay, he had his debut 91 and then went from there. But he's come from an era where kayfabe wasn't broken and you totally submerge yourself in that world. And when they show him from various public appearances that he made in that sort of early mid-90s, and he is the Undertaker the whole time. Yeah. And over time, that's kind of just drifted away a little bit, just dissipated, especially around all the curtain call stuff and as the business changed. Yeah, but the Undertaker didn't. He continued to live his gimmick, and he's so submerged in it that I think he has just become it.
Yeah, so it's interesting you said earlier that the many layers to him. It's almost like there's only one layer to him, and that is he is the Undertaker, and that's it. Although again, I'm not sure why. Taking all that, obviously he picked up the baton from people like Hogan and Savage, who when heels and faces travelled separately and they protected the storyline separately and in and out of the ring. So he sort of picked that up and continued. And you think about today, to take your point, like the reality era, actually it's less about gimmicks and stuff. It's more about people just trying to be themselves or being versions of themselves. So he's definitely got that, but there's still something different in him because there's no reason why he couldn't have just gone 5 years ago. Actually, that's it. I'm finished now and just transition out. But I suppose because him and the Undertaker the Undertaker and Mark Calloway are so synonymous that maybe it's just when he retires the Undertaker, he's retiring a larger part of him than maybe Shawn Michaels was or Edge was.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in terms of the actual documentary itself, it was interesting that they started the first episode with Reigns at 33, which was when it was supposed to be his actual retirement.
Yeah.
Then drifted back to WrestleMania 30.
Yeah.
And then brought it all the way up to the Boneyard match, which happened a couple of months ago.
Yeah. And in hindsight, it looks like it wasn't clear at the time, but in hindsight, WrestleMania 33 with Reigns, that looks like he was going to retire. That looked, I mean, obviously people were saying it at the time, but certainly now with this extra stuff, we know that it looks to me like this documentary was originally going to be about him retiring at WrestleMania 33, and actually it spawned into something else about how does he now retire, which is what episodes 2, 3, and 4 are about, and I think they're not quite as good, partly because WWE is stringing them out, but it's 3 episodes of him struggling with this turmoil, and it almost feels a little bit like, there's a lot of interesting quotes in there. He talks about, if I had to retire, I would, but do I want to? And he also talks about, I'm once as good as I ever was. So you can see he still thinks there's still a lot of him in the decision. And again, in episode 3, it's similar sort of callbacks. He says, if this is the last time, and how envious he is of Shawn Michaels walking away. Batista actually says in episode 3, if you keep getting asked, you keep on. So you can see that it's almost like with Undertaker and Vince, they're so submerged in the Undertaker and the character, they can't take the step back. And if someone just said to the Undertaker, well, you see that person over there, they're 55 years old, this is the rehab they've had to go through, this is should they retire? almost like Mark Calloway would say, yeah, of course they should retire, as a locker room leader. But because he's in the moment, he can't separate himself out. And so he just ends up keeps doing this awful stuff, which is actually, you talk about WrestleMania 30 and losing the streak. Really, over the last 2 or 3 years, he's been in some absolutely atrocious matches. And that's really what episodes 3 and 4 are about. It talks about the stuff in Saudi. It talks about his match with Triple H, the last ever. It talks about his match, which Triple H calls bad comedy, with Kane as mayor, Michaels out of retirement, Triple H torn pec, and Undertaker at 54, 55 years old. It's the Goldberg match where they nearly kill each other. So those that middle episode really is just reiteration after reiteration. The Undertaker should probably be retired, but he keeps doing these matches, and Michelle McCool says they keep getting. He does them badly, so then he's got to come back and do another one. But he does it badly, so he's got to come back and do another one. And really, he should be in the Performance Center helping others, which is also shown in the show.
Yeah, I was about to say, which he is actually doing. Yeah, there was that run, wasn't there, between WrestleMania 33, April 17, when he fights Reigns, and then all the way through to, well, up to and including Extreme Rules when he's fighting Shane O'Mac and Drew McIntyre in that tag match.
Yeah.
So that's a run of, well, over 2 years where he's just having match after match. And he does actually say that he felt in really good shape at that point, and that's a potential driver for him to keep going and keep striving for that one match. But he's being booked with talent 50 plus most of the time. Yeah,
exactly. It just doesn't make sense. It was obvious in advance, and then it was obvious when you watched it. The last time ever with Triple H was awful. It was so slow. And the match in Saudi
Super Showdown in October 18.
Is it? Yeah, and the DX match versus the Brothers of Destruction that followed that.
Yep, Crown Jewel, November 18. Yeah.
That was awful as well, and it almost makes you resent the Undertaker to a small extent. But just stop. And the Goldberg match, which was the worst of the lot, it just makes you want him to stop. But in terms of the series, the first episode really grabs you of, oh, this is really difficult for him. The next really shows you his tribulations. And then by episode 5, it might be actually the best episode because it sort of pulls back the veil for closure. And he talks about, I wasn't ready to retire when filming began, but I sort of am now. And you see him, like you said, going down to the Performance Center. He talks about, quite openly, I have to train 10 times as hard for a quarter of the results. And then he talks about some home stuff about his brother dying. And then he has that Boneyard match. And you can see the joy on his face, which he hasn't had previously. Previously, it's sort of contorted with the weight of trying to retire. Actually, he talks about the Boneyard match and the feedback it got and how important that was for him. And that almost brings him the closure that means that he can leave. So I thought episode 5 was really, really, probably the best episode, was really good as it brought the series to an end and brought the Undertaker to an end, because even if he was on Stone Cold podcast as well, even if he is going to come back now, the Undertaker gimmick has been largely shattered because of the documentary stuff that he's done. Yeah. So actually the conclusion was worked really well in that sense, in that it concluded the documentary. It sort of concluded the Undertaker. And having now seen it all, at the time I didn't want him to be retired, and I'm not a massive fan of the Boneyard match, but I can see the struggle he has to go out on a high. I can see how much that match worked and meant for him. And so actually, given all that, the documentary took me through his journey into agreeing with him that I sort of hope he is retired now.
And even if he's not, whatever guys he comes back in won't be the same as, oh, here comes Taker for another Mania match.
No, it can't be. It can't be exactly. Yeah, so maybe there's one match in him at Survivor Series against Styles. But what I hope is he sort of retires and steps away and does that stuff in the Performance Center, because what you don't want is him turning up every night on Raw, just doing the walk, doing a choke slam stuff. I think, it needs to be gone. He needs to be gone, because actually, I know he's a great performer and has all those accolades. What are you talking about? His last 5 years? How many bad matches has he had? How many good matches has he had? Hardly any.
Since WrestleMania 30, he's had 15 matches, not including anything on TV.
Right. Okay. And so some of those were Wyatt at WrestleMania 31, But then he had the poor match with Roman. He had the Hell in a Cell that was slow with Shane. Rusev casket match, like the DX stuff, the Triple H stuff. So really, he hasn't done a lot of good work in the ring in a long time. And the documentary does actually lay that bare.
Yeah.
Hopefully it means that he is now retired and content with that retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think his last decent match was against Triple H at 28. But yeah.
Not Punk at 29.
Not as good.
Or what about the Hell in a Cell matches against Lesnar?
Yeah.
Hell in a Cell 2015. Too gimmicky for you, was it?
Too gimmick. Right. Yeah. So how should Undertaker be used with his 15-year contract just in the Performance Center?
I think so. I think that's the best use for. I mean, because it's the Undertaker, you might think about him differently. But in terms of stars like Goldberg coming back and part timers at top of cards, really, what those wrestlers should be doing is transitioning to the next stars. Going out on their shield, putting someone else over, and then in the Performance Center backstage, giving back and working. I think that makes obvious. That seems obvious to me. It makes perfect sense.
Stops him gallivanting to any other company or show.
Yeah. Although I think, wasn't he talking about, he would never leave WWE anyway, and it seems at 55 or whatever he probably wouldn't. But
yeah,
I suppose never say never.
Yeah.
Ric Flair retired on WWE TV and went to Australia in a fight with Hogan. So anything can happen, but that's Ric Flair, isn't it?
I suppose Undertaker is almost its own brand, its own unique selling point.
So what's your final comments on that documentary series then?
I enjoyed it. I mean, for the most part, it's just such an interesting person and an interesting gimmick, which makes for an interesting career. I don't particularly like the way WWE present their documentaries, where we have to sit through promos and long clips of matches that we can just watch on the network anyway.
Yeah, they tell you what to think, justify what we're doing.
So I don't mind a little bit of clips or whatever, obviously for context of the show and what's happening and what they're talking about. But let's be honest, we're all watching that stuff for what's going on around the business rather than the business itself.
Yeah.
But that aside, it gives such an insight, not just into Taker as well, like into, he's got quite a unique relationship with Vince. You probably see Vince in a slightly different light. And hearing other talent talking about Undertaker, they just talk about him and hold him in a totally different light.
Yeah, very high
Batista, Michaels, even Triple H.
Edge.
They just have him on a totally different plane. And I don't think you'll ever see anything quite like that again. So for all those reasons, it just makes for an intriguing watch, even if it is dragged out.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's 5 episodes. It should be 3, but actually, it's very interesting for all the reasons you've said. It's a really good watch, and it's better than the other one we reviewed in our first episode. WWE produced Ruthless Aggression. The chronology, the focus on Undertaker, it really builds a story, and it really gets you. And it also really, now you've seen it, you sort of forget, but it also now breaks the gimmick, breaks the kayfabe that we just hadn't had up to that point. So it's very good.
See you on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. Get on Twitter and think about those 25 questions.
Until next time.
Time to tap out.
Sayonara.